Hello and welcome back to Portrait of an Editor. In this episode, Robyn Chapman discusses her work on First Second's release of Homicide, the graphic novel, which is an adaptation of David Simon's nonfiction book Homicide, A Year on the Killing Streets, and that book ended up being the source material for the award-winning TV show Homicide, Life on the Streets. Robyn provides some great info on the unique journey the detailed adaptation took from the States to France and back. She also details all the hard work the First Second crew did to realize this impressive two-part graphic novel. Enjoy! Robyn, welcome to Portrait of an Editor. I guess we're going to just dive right into it because and talk about Homicide, the graphic novel, and everything, and just focus on that, because I don't know if I've ever talked about it in the years I've been doing the podcast, but Homicide, Life on the Street, and then of course I went back, which was the TV show I was a huge fan of. There's a group of friends that we would just always talk about it and really enjoyed the show. And of course, eventually I went back and read the nonfiction book by David Simon, Homicide, A Year on the Killing Streets, which came out in 1991, which is 32 years ago, is an excellent book. So welcome on to the show. Let's just talk Homicide, I guess. My first question is, just give us sort of anybody who's listening and realizing, oh, wait, I'm a fan of The Wire, I'm a fan of the TV show, and also the books that David's written and the other shows he's done, and now here's a graphic novel. How did you, First Second, come to publishing this?
Well, it's kind of an interesting story. It's not the typical path that a graphic novel usually takes when it's published. So of course, David Simon wrote Homicide, A Year on the Killing Streets in 1991, and several years later, in 2018, a French publisher called Delcourt published a 4-volume adaptation of his novel, his piece of true crime writing. And so then we licensed from the French publisher their French edition and did an English version in 2 volumes. So from what I understand, the illustrator, Philippe Squarzoni, he worked very closely with David creating this graphic novel in French. And then we kind of joined the party a few years later to make an English edition.
So
go
ahead.
No. So that's that story basically. So we didn't. It's not sort of a typical graphic novel where we acquire it from the writer or the writer artist team and develop it over time with them. It's a license, which is a little different, and we do those fairly often at First Second. Really from the beginning, our editorial director, creative director, Mark Siegel, he's been interested in Franco-Belgian comics, and we've throughout the years we've published them.
And it's an unabridged adaptation from the French. It's unabridged, it seems, because of we're talking almost 700 pages of work.
Yeah, that's right. It's the first one's 300 something. The second one's 400. These are long books. And so we usually don't. It's interesting because the original source material is in English, and then it was translated into French, and then I wouldn't say to say we translated it back into English isn't quite right, because we weren't playing like a game of telephone where we were translating the French back into English, because that really didn't make sense. Basically, it was like an adaptation. We took the French, source material and then went back to the original text by David Simon and put that in to the word balloons, basically. So it's as faithful to David Simon's book as we could possibly be. Because otherwise it'd be a game of telephone, translating into French, then translating back into English, and having something that's garbled and is not as beautiful as David Simon's original writing.
Yeah, when I worked at Humanoids, we did a lot of translation, and there was some crime stuff that um, when I got the French translation, because it was written in French and then it was translated into English, I was like, whoa, this is missing the American attitude or temperature of to be, they're the French are doing something based in, a story's based in America, but it's all written in French and then it comes over.
Mhm.
And it's like, I had to sit down and go, okay, I need to sort of tap into whatever crime stuff I like and sort of bring it back around to make it sound very American. But you guys had the benefit of David's novel, which is a big tome, a pretty big tome, and you went right back into it and were able to just
Yeah.
pull right out of that. Okay, that's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Philippe did a lot of that work. He basically, went back to the original and pasted in the text as best he could into the balloons and into the captions, and then we edited it carefully because English is not his first language, so every once in a while tenses wouldn't match, or it was just wasn't quite right. So or sometimes this is an adaptation of David Simon's work. So sometimes scenes are omitted, sometimes you know, they're contracted, or they're two scenes are joined together, and so the text needs to be adjusted so it makes sense for this new adaptation. Um, so sometimes, like if you take the text verbatim, it doesn't make sense because um, of the way the panel is laid out, or what's happening in the panel. Like you don't like you could say all three of the criminals were guilty, but in the panel there's only two criminals because the scene was contracted or something. So you just have to change 3 to 2, things like that. That just but we tried to keep it really faithful to the text, and only make those edits when it was kind of necessary for practical reasons.
Yeah, it's an interesting translation going from English to French back to English, and then realizing I people, I know it seems like, oh, that would be easy. You're just putting in, but no, there's so much more work on just making things fit, because you didn't change the artwork. You didn't change
Yeah.
anything of the graphic novel, but then you go back
Mhm.
to the source again because it was just easier. Yeah. It, uh, so there was nothing changed from what the French version, the graphic novel, all the visuals and everything is
I mean,
basically
there might have
straight.
been a few like tiny things, like a couple places where we're like, we don't really have the rights to use that logo, so we're gonna erase it. Um, or something like, well, I guess one thing I remember is that one of the American flags, the way it was drawn in the background, as an American citizen, I could tell, oh, those stripes are way too skinny. Whereas a French citizen, maybe like it looks fine. So we just thickened up the red stripes on the American flag. Like that's like it, like very minimal stuff like that.
So yeah. So you get, I mean, the book comes to first, second. They basically, for lack of a better term, option the French
Mm-hmm.
version.
Yes.
So what was your involvement? How did you start from square one on this translation, seeing it's a unique translation? You're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I got the source in English, so I don't have to worry about my French. But, you know, um, how did you sort of sit down and go, how am I going to attack this translation?
Well, Mark Siegel is the acquiring editor, so he made the deal happen. It did take some like negotiation between David Simon's original publisher, which is in the Macmillan umbrella. For Second is a imprint of Macmillan. So that part was fairly easy, but we also had to work out the rights, like the graphic novel rights in English. Like, so there was some like contract negotiation stuff part to like make sure, okay, we have all the rights cleared to publish this in English. Um, and then I kind of took over managing the project once we had all the rights secured and the contract signed. And usually what we would do is, with a French license, is we'd take this French graphic novel and send it to one of our translators and say, translate this into English. And actually we did do that at first. And we got the translation back, and Philippe looked at it and he said, no, this isn't quite right. let's go back to the source material, David's source material, and I will do the translation, which was really not translating my French, or but going to the book and like really copying and pasting as much as he could that English text into his comic. So really replacing his French with the English text as best he could. And he did a really great job, but they just needed a little polishing here and there. So then we get that translation, and me and a number of other editors like just kind of polished that English text, and also, you know, there was some, you know, copy edited it because you know, again, Philippe, you know, English is not his first language, so like there's just, you know, some, and really with any manuscript there's going to be typos. So there was like the polishing of the English, and there was also a good amount of design work that had to go into the book, because the word balloons, the English is often like shorter than the French, so some of the word balloons were too big or too small. And so thankfully all those word balloons were on their own layer in Photoshop, but our design team had to do a lot of adjusting to the word balloons to make them the right size. And also they designed a new cover for each volume, and it took a lot of care in the designing of the book. I think it looks really lovely. So there's a whole team. There's me and the freelance editors who worked on the project. There's the designers. There's our production editors who handle the copy editing and the keeping the book on schedule and getting out to the printer. And we worked with Philippe very closely through the process. Like each pass that went through copy edit, we shared with him to make sure like he was okay with any of the corrections. And he also was really interested in how the book was designed. Like we were thinking about different ways to create chapter pages, because there wasn't originally chapters in the French version. It was it 5 volumes or was it 4 volumes? It was 5. Yes, 5 volumes, 5 short volumes. That's often how the French do it.
Yeah, and you're bringing, is it the standard size of the bande dessinée, or?
Yeah, it's you know, it's they're like kind of oversized hardcover albums, and we didn't publish it that large. Typically, when we bring in French, we shrink it down because they publish their books so large compared to how we do it. But it's still a pretty large book. I believe it's at least 6 by 9 page dimension, and then very thick because it's so long. We had to figure out how do we make 2 books out of 5. We decided to divide up into each volume up into chapters, and then how do we design those chapters? So we worked with Philippe closely on all of that. And then finally it's ready to print, and so we send it to the printer. And so, you know, book 1 is printed, book 2 I believe is probably printed at this time. It's away at the printer, and then they're shared with the world. So that's more or less the process that we do.
Did you go back to the novel to try to figure out maybe the chapter breaks? Because it's been a while since I've read the novel, but of course there's chapters in that, and there's, I think, even parts, you know, it's broken down. Did you do that? Did you go back to, you know, sort of help you?
Thankfully, we didn't have to do that, because the way Philippe broke up the volumes, it's kind of unique. It would have like these blank pages that were kind of like these pauses between sections, and we just decided to call those chapters and number them. So we had to be a little creative on where we ended book 1 and where we started book 2. Book 1 is volume in the American book 1 is the French book 1, 2, and part of 3, and then our book 2 is the last half of 3, 4, and 5. So we had to kind of we just asked Philippe, where's a good place to end? And he said, okay, we'll do it here. So that, I guess that's the only place we kind of inserted a chapter that wasn't already, or a break rather, that wasn't already in there, because he had all these blank pages that were sort of pauses between sections, but were numbered as chapters.
And the first volume is out, right? Let's get that, you know, so any Homicide fans out there, it's available.
just recently came out. Yes.
And what about number 2? When is that going to hit the shelves?
And Homicide Part 2 is December. It's December 5th of this year. So yeah, fall of this year.
Was David Simon involved in this translation? Did he have any involvement in moving, prepping it for the American market or the English market?
He wasn't that involved. We did send each cover, each pass, the final PDF to him for approval, and he was really hands off. Like, I think he had some feedback about the cover copy, but he really didn't like I guess meddle or with our this version too much. One question that did come up, you know, Homicide, the life on the killing or a year on the killing streets that took place in the late 80s in a police precinct with these sort of hard-boiled detectives, and they sometimes are use language and like derisive slang, and that is not really appropriate to especially by today's standards. And so one question was like, should we edit this volume, edit their dialogue when they say something that's inappropriate, or like even somewhat hateful. And we checked in with David because we weren't going to make that decision without him, and he said, hey, they said this is what happened, let's just keep it. And so we did. Yeah, we did. We did put a little message in the front to saying that this is an unvarnished and honest story, and we remain faithful to the original. And sometimes the words in this book are offensive, but they paint an accurate portrait of life inside a homicide unit in Baltimore in the late 80s. So that was kind of the one area where he was the most involved, where we were considering making an editorial change to the work. But he said, you know what, let's not. And we're like, yep, I agree. Let's stay faithful to the original. But otherwise he was very hands off.
The thing about the novel, and even the thing that rang the show too, is the frustration at times that these officers ended up having in the systems they were in. And The Wire, of course, develops that even further about just humans dealing with the frustration at times. And as homicide cops, every day you're seeing a body, or dealing with a body and trying to find people. And I can see 30 years ago, things have moved in how to interact with each other and how to have a little more respect. I think hopefully with the expectations of people, but it's a great snapshot of what it was like, and the job that these cops were trying to do. And as they say in the show, the last, I think, speaking for the dead, basically. And I think that comes up in the novel. I think it's probably somewhere. You're probably a little more familiar with the novel. Like I said, it's been a while since I've read it, but I remember in the show, they would always bring that up, that it was an element of like, we might be the only people that can speak for the people who have left us. But it is, there's something raw about it, and stuff like that. I'm glad it was kept. Is that something that's, especially there was something, I think Criterion just ended up getting, there was an article I was reading because they actually went into the French Connection, and Popeye Doyle, Gene Hackman's character, was not the greatest cop, and some of the words he was using. And I guess they actually changed some of the scenes, which was just odd to read, instead of putting a warning up front, because you're talking about a movie that's 50 years old, but, in just another, once again, a snapshot. And I like, if you're going to say, sort of just a warning. Is that something, I guess, for a second, considers all the time when they're adaptation, especially something that's older? Is that one to, sort of just case basis?
It hasn't come up that much because we don't do a ton of adaptations, especially adaptations of works that are older. So it doesn't come up that often. There is, at times that we'll, like, since we're talking about like foreign licenses, sometimes we'll license a work that from France often, and like the sort of the norms in France are a little different than in America, especially for like what they publish for kids. And so sometimes we might make a judgment that, for an American market for kids, like we should change this language, or we should maybe even change the start. We, at first second, we do that very little. I've worked at other publishers where they had sort of some standard rules about how they publish books for children, like, for example, maybe no cigarettes in any books for children. In French publications for children, that's you'd often see like parents smoking, or maybe even like teenagers smoking. At a publisher I worked at previously, we would just, Photoshop out those cigarettes, because we had some hard rules that no cigarettes in a book for kids, no alcohol. And we don't have that at first second. Like, sometimes, for example, we published this the series Castle in the Stars, and it's set in like the 1890s, and there's a kid who smokes a pipe. And, that was a question that came up in the editing process, like, hey, this is a book for kids. Should we show like this young person smoking a pipe? And we kept it in. They were like, this is from a long time ago. Like, I don't think pipe smoking is like a real danger today among children. I think they're going to understand that we're not promoting smoking. That this takes place in like France in the 1890s.
Yeah. And that leads me to one question I wanted to ask, is that now First Second is pretty much known as a YA publisher, but that's not
middle
true.
grade.
In middle grade.
We do like a bunch of middle grade, a lot of YA, but we've always done adult books as well from our beginning. Yeah. So we really publish for all age groups. But a large, this is definitely adult. This is in our adult catalog. But I'd say our adult portion is smaller than our portion for kids and teens. But yeah, we definitely put out a number of books a year for adult.
I'm just thinking, is this a sort of moving when it comes to First Second's approach to publishing adults, adult material? Is this something a step forward, or sort of new ground in a way of approaching?
Yeah. I think it is, because it is really an ambitious duology, and also it's coming out in a time where we are really trying to be more ambitious with our adult publishing. Like, if you look at our adult publishing coming out in 2023, you'll see that the number of titles is higher, and also like we are creating a more sort of cohesive design to a lot of our adult titles, so they kind of look like when you look at the spines, they look like they belong on a shelf together. So I think and a lot of that is Kirk, our art director, Kirk. He's taking a lot of care into the sort of the package of our adult material. And yeah, so I think that if you look at the books that are coming out this year and next, you will see we're kind of leveling up. Also, in the last few years, we put out this adult series called World Citizen Comics, and that was really ambitious. And those are nonfiction books for teens and adults about civics, teaching readers how to be informed citizens and informed voters. And they're by a number of authors on different topics, and the authors are all experts in their fields. So those books have been, very ambitious. Like, take so much research, and then taking all that information and giving it to an artist to illustrate it on the page. That's it's not an easy thing to do. So, and trying to put those books out on a really regular schedule, putting out several a year. So that's part of like another leveling up of our adult list, I would say.
And that's something that First Second has done for younger readers from the beginning, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like we've been doing science comics and history
Yeah.
comics for several years. So we've been doing nonfiction graphic novels for a while, but this this sort of profile series for adult, and their books are so beautifully designed. They're hardcover with this cloth binding spine, and really gorgeously designed. Um, and yeah, so and a lot of this is all Mark Siegel, our editorial and creative director. This is his vision, working with our art director Kirk, to like kind of be more ambitious with our adult.
And so the Homicide, yeah, because I only read the online version that you sent me. It's a hardcover
Mhm.
with with what you just described, basically. That
Yeah,
I would just sorry.
it's a so it's a jacketed hardcover, really beautiful design. We created we worked with Philippe, the artist, to create all new designs for the covers. So yeah, it's a jacket, and then there's a design on the case, and there's end sheets, and it's printed on uncoated paper. It's a really beautiful package.
So I guess to wrap some things up, what do you think about what did you think about working on this project as the editor and sort of having to approach it differently than the typical translation? I mean, and also the material. What did you think about just the whole experience?
It was challenging because it was different. It was, we couldn't follow our typical formula for licensing. So, um, and even just all the work before the book is actually put together, like the contractual stuff, the licensing, we had, a couple of different parties to work with. We had to work with David Simon, we had to work with Philippe, and we had to work with the French publisher Delcourt. So just the paperwork part of it, which is, not the fun part, but that was a lot of work. So getting all that taken care of, and then figuring out how this is gonna be translated, or how the English text is gonna be imported in. That was something new for us. And also, yeah, Philippe was a very involved author, and he had strong opinions about some things like the cover design or the end sheets, or um, you know, even the balloon size and placement. Like, so we had to work closely to make sure that he was happy with the um with the end result. Um, so it was yeah, we couldn't follow our standard formula for licensing, which is often a little less involved. Like often we're working more directly with just one party, the French publisher, because we license from the French publisher, not from the French author. And often they give a pretty easy rubber stamp approval to what we translate and publish. Often they're very concerned with that we get their copyright information correct, that we credit them as the original publisher correctly, and that the author's name is spelled right and all those things. But they often, the French publisher isn't as involved in our translation of their version.
So after this, David Simon also wrote the book The Corner,
Mhm.
which was basically sort of a few years after another nonfiction. Is that has that been adapted in France at all? Is there any
Not
thoughts about bringing that in?
not that I know of. I haven't heard anything about that.
Oh, okay. I was just
But
wondering if Philippe
we
was
might
maybe
be
thinking.
we might be game. Like we could do this now that we've done this once. Like it'd be a lot easier to do it again.
Would it be something? I know this is just that that would come from First Second and just stay adapted by First Second in the American market, or do you think Philippe is even thinking about maybe going to seeing what else David has and maybe tapping into The
I'm
Corner?
not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's a possibility, or if Philippe was interested. I mean, Philippe did such a good job. Like
Hmm.
so much research had to go into drawing this. He had the novel, of course, but he had to take these scenes that were described in the novel and like draw like what's on the background in a you know the office of a police precinct, or what a like crime scene looks like. And he had limited like source material, but he was really able to dig up a lot, and he did a great job. Like especially considering that he is an American. He doesn't live in Baltimore, but he captured the feeling and the atmosphere so well. But I know it took so much work. So that's a question that Philippe will have to ask himself if he wants to take that on again.
Yeah.
But we might be game. Like this. I mean, I think they really are amazing books. And really just you learn so much about the minutia of how this sort of police work is done, and how daunting and kind of discouraging it can be at times when you're trying to do this important work, speak for the dead, as you said, and sometimes you just can't make that arrest, or like you can't find the guilty party, or like it doesn't work out and you feel like you're letting this family, this victim down. I mean, it kind of gets to their it kind of gets to their hearts and souls, and it's painful. So there's a lot of that, but also just the minutia of every step of you know doing a case like this. Like, what's it like going to the morgue? What's it like going to a crime scene? What's it like then going to court and having to speak about this case, and how they have to sort of have their ambitions and their hopes checked a little, because they don't really have control over whether this person who they think is guilty will be found guilty, whether they'll be sent to jail. Like, it's out of their hands. They can, and I'm sure that is hard to accept sometimes.
Yeah, Philippe captured a lot, and working from David's novel, which is extremely detailed, but yeah, the first part I just read, and he's nailing it. He's nailing the frustration. He's nailing the life. And also now I'm seeing these characters who I read the novel, then I saw them in sort of spin-offs into the TV show, and now I'm seeing the real people again, and just sort of like the bear. I'm like, okay, now I remember what he looked like and everything. It just he wasn't lazy in creating this series, adapting this book by any means. It was a work of passion, I guess. So it was really happy to read what I read,
Oh, I'm glad.
So, well, is there anything else you'd like to say about it, as before we sign off, regarding the graphic novel, part 1 and part 2?
Just that I'm really thankful to all the the partners that helped us make this book, Kirk Benshoff, and Sunny, who helped so much. Yeah, Sunny Lee, who helped so much with the design, and our various freelance editors like Dennis Pacheco, and Philippe himself, who was such a great partner throughout this, and I hope he's happy with the product. We really tried to bring his beautiful work from France to an American audience. So I guess one thing I hope is clear from this conversation is so many people go into making a book. You might just see the author's name on the cover, but there's this whole army of people, and folks I haven't even mentioned, like our production editor, or our managing editor, or our publisher, or our marketing and publicity folks. It's a real team. So I'm thankful to all those people who helped, who pitched in to make such beautiful books.
Well, thank you, Robyn, and I'll have to have you come back, and we can have a much longer conversation about what you do at First Second, and also what was it? The Paper Rocket mini comics too. So
yeah.
It was great meeting you, and thank you so much for this, shepherding, this translation. And we'll talk again, I guess.
So. Oh, thanks. Thank you so much, Francis, for the conversation.
You're welcome. See you later. Bye.
See you. Bye.